Let's get started. I think there are going to be more folks filtering in, but we'll go through the initial aspects and have folks join us as we go. Since it's one, as you know, at FiRe we always like to be right on time. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I know it's that afternoon witching hour, so I hope everyone has a little jolt of caffeine or whatever it is that keeps you going at this time of day. Raleigh Cole says, unfortunately, over 100 degrees in Austin is not unusual. So for those of you who are joining us or soon to join us, this is our first FiRe HQ book club. As some of you may know, FiRe HQ is the social network that we have built for FiRe members and Strategic News Service members. So various attendees of the conference, Future in Review, and the Strategic News Service. I'm Evan Anderson. I will be your host today. You've probably seen me in many different roles in those various branches of those organizations. I'm the CEO of Invent IP. I'm also the Deputy Director of Programming for FiRe and the Director of FiRe HQ, amongst many other hats that I wear to and fro throughout the octopus organization we have created. I'm here today, and it is my great honor to be here today with John Hagel. For those of you who attended FiRe, I think it was 3 years ago, John, you were talking on stage, and I actually read through the transcript about the kind of early iterations of this book, and you're thinking about it. So for FiRe attendees, John has been with us a long time. We're very honored to have his time today, and these are themes that perhaps are not entirely new to some of our conference folks. A couple just basic housekeeping things before we get into this. This is a new format, so for those of you used to our fireside meetings, we are in the webinar format, which means that we can allow people to speak if we decide to. The easiest way to get this done today, I think, will be that you will see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A box. So if you scroll down to the very bottom, you just click Q&A and you can enter questions. And that way I will just be able to read them out, and you can then chat with each other in the chat box. Q&As go in their little spot, and we can move from there. So let's get into it, John. I don't believe you need any introduction, but for the sake of anybody who does not know who you are, I'll give you one. John has spent over 40 years in Silicon Valley as a management consultant, entrepreneur, speaker, and author. And actually his specific, this will, I think, be relevant for today, but his stated narrative perhaps is that he is driven by the desire to help individuals and institutions around the world to increase their impact in a rapidly changing world. John was at Deloitte, where he founded the Center for the Edge. He also worked for many years at McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group. He served as the Senior Vice President of Strategy at Atari and is the founder of 2 Silicon Valley startups. He is currently on the board of trustees at the Santa Fe Institute, on the faculty of Singularity University, and has led a number of initiatives regarding business transformation with the World Economic Forum. He is also the author of 7 other books. His book today that we're going to be talking about is The Journey Beyond Fear. As I mentioned, for those of you that were at FiRe, I believe in about 3 or 4 years ago in Park City, he was talking about some of the early thoughts that he had about this book. So with that, I think we're just going to dive in, John, and I'm going to ask you what, for those of you who are in the audience, will become our 3 preliminary questions for any book club. And I think that these will help us kind of get to the bottom of what the book is aiming to do, and then we will move into a little bit more nitty-gritty, and I will open it up for general Q&A. So John, first off, what drove you to write this book?
I think there were 2 catalysts in particular. One was throughout most of my business career, I was a business strategist, and I was taught to believe that strategy is everything. If you come up with the right strategy, you win. And over time, I've actually come to believe that it's less about strategy and more about psychology. That if we don't understand the emotions that are shaping our choices and actions, the best strategy is just going to sit on a shelf somewhere. So I've been more and more focused on the emotional dimension. And in that context, I actually started writing the book about 3 years ago. And I travel around the world as part of my work. And I was struck that everywhere I went, the dominant emotion that I was encountering was fear. At the highest levels of organizations, at the lowest levels out in the front lines, out in the communities, fear was everywhere. And while I think it's understandable, I think it's also a very limiting emotion. And so it really motivated me to write the book to help people make that journey beyond fear.
Fantastic. Well, I hope it works. I too have noticed that trend, and I think we could definitely use a little bit more motivation to move beyond it. So that kind of leads easily into our second main introductory question, which is, what do you hope readers will learn from it? And perhaps as an add-on, I guess, having identified that fear is such a theme in today's, I mean, all you have to do is look at the news cycle, right? What do you think leaders will get out of this book, or employees will get out of this book that help them with that?
Yeah, well, I'm hopeful that everyone, I mean, it's not just leaders or employees, it's all people everywhere. I mean, again, I think this is a very widespread situation. And I think the first thing is that they'll recognize that fear is understandable. I think that many of us are afraid of fear. We don't even want to acknowledge that we have fear, much less share it with others. And while it's understandable, I think hopefully that readers will learn that it's also very limiting as an emotion. It limits us in terms of achieving the impact that's really meaningful to us. And then that they'll learn that it's possible and necessary to cultivate the emotions that can enable us to make the journey beyond fear, so that we can move beyond it. We're not prisoners of fear. And finally, that journey can lead to much greater impact that's really meaningful to us, so that it's worth making that journey because the rewards are significant in terms of impact that makes meaning for us. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. And my third question was actually, what effect do you want to see it have on the world? And I think that leads into what you were just talking about, but a better follow-on would maybe be when you imagine that people are doing what you've described and moving beyond fear on a regular basis, what's like a good specific kind of case study example of how you see that playing out, right? What's something that's happening today that you think could benefit from more people moving beyond fear?
Well, I think first of all, I think part of my reason for writing the book is it's partly addressed to the individual and the fear we're feeling as individuals. But in part two, I want us to recognize that the environments we've created are feeding the fear, are intensifying the fear, and that we need to make a commitment to evolve those environments in ways that will encourage us and help us to move beyond the fear as individuals. If we just focus on individuals and say, move beyond the fear, yeah, we'll make some progress. But if we're in environments that are crushing that and discouraging us and encouraging the fear, we're not going to achieve the impact that we really want to or need to. So part of the notion of the book is to really build environments that will encourage this and support this. And I think the rewards, again, are pretty amazing. I think at the end, I'm a believer that we are in a world where there's exponentially expanding opportunity. We can create much more value with far less resource, far more quickly than we could have done a decade or two ago. But if we're driven by fear, we can't even see those opportunities. We're blind to them, much less pursue them. And so again, at the end, my hope is that we can create a world where there's growing opportunity for more and more people.
Yeah, and you talked a lot in the book about the difference between zero-sum and positive-sum thinking, which I think rings very truly for me. Just when I look at the world and the actors in it, right? I think there's a strong trend between those two things. You can kind of tell who's who a lot of the time when you look at either geopolitical bodies or companies. There's always, the groups that are positive-sum and are focused on collaborating in order to create a bigger pie. Versus those folks that are trying to kind of fight for zero-sum outcomes where they get everything out of a limited resource. And one of the things I was thinking about when I was reading your book that I'd like to kind of ask you to expound upon is, I think that the zero-sum people fall behind faster the more the positive-sum people go to work. And is that something that you kind of found to be a theme when you were writing this?
I'm sorry, that the zero-sum people fall behind?
In other words, zero-sum thinking is made increasingly irrelevant the more that positive-sum thinking is promoted, right?
Yeah, well, I think the paradox is that if we're driven by fear and zero-sum view of the world, we are going to be more and more marginalized because we're not going to see the opportunities that are available to us. And we're going to be fighting to hold on to what we have, and that's going to become smaller and smaller over time. So again, I think it's a reason to recognize the limits of fear and the need to adopt a much broader opportunity-based view of the future.
Yeah. So I think let's get into it, right? So you've got 3 pillars that you identify in your book, all of which are quite interesting, and they go, I think, neatly in order. I think it's the proper order for them. And the first one is narrative, and there you identified a large number actually of different types of narrative and types of narrative that are perhaps less useful to this manner of thinking. So can you walk us through that a little bit and sort of explain how you see narrative and personal narrative and what your definitions are and how that shapes your view?
Yeah, the challenge for me in writing the book is I've ended up focusing on 3 pillars. And for each pillar, I have a very different definition of the term than most people do. So in the context of narrative, if you talk to most people, narrative is the same as a story. Story and narrative, they're synonyms. You can use either one and you're talking about the same thing. In my view, there is a significant distinction that can and should be made between the two. And the short form is, for me, a story is self-contained. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. The end, the story is over. And the story is about me, the storyteller, or it's about some other people, real or imagined, but it's not about you.
Yeah.
You can use your imagination, figure out what you would have done in that story, but it's not about you. It's about other people. And so that is a story. On the other side, for me, a narrative is very different. First of all, it's open-ended. There is no end yet. There is some kind of very big threat or opportunity out in the future, not clear whether it's going to be achieved or not. And the resolution of the narrative hinges on you. It's a call to action, to say your choices, your actions are going to help determine how this narrative plays out. What's it going to be? And I think it creates a sense of agency on the part of people that they can and need to make a difference in the world. And then, as you said, I talk about narrative at many different levels. I think all of us as individuals have what I call a personal narrative, even though I think very few of us have made the effort to really articulate it, much less reflect on whether it's the best narrative for us. So part of the book is going through that effort. And then there are corporate or institutional narratives. And again, I think this is an untapped opportunity. I think very few companies, at least in my experience, have what I would call a corporate narrative. And then geographical narratives. I've been in Silicon Valley, as you said, for 40 years. People ask all the time, what's the reason for the success of Silicon Valley over so many decades? And my view is one of the key elements of success is a very inspiring narrative that drew people from all over the world. There is an opportunity to change the world, but you have to come to Silicon Valley and be part of this. Will you come? And then there are movement narratives. I think movements try to mobilize and inspire people with a narrative. But I think too, I will just say, I do make an important distinction between threat-based narratives and opportunity-based narratives. And I think most of the narratives we have today are threat-based narratives. The enemy's coming to get us. We're all going to die. We need to mobilize now and resist. And again, while I think that may be understandable, in my view, that is not what is going to mobilize and motivate people to really take action in a much more effective way. And we need to shift to opportunity-based narratives that will inspire people and bring them together as opposed to pulling them apart. So anyway, let me stop there and just see if that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that a lot while I was reading those sections on narrative, because we've worked a lot on some issues that are very clearly focused on emerging threats, right? And we write about those issues a lot. And I think it's easy when you're doing so to be so focused on the threat that you forget, what the next step is. And I've actually had some interesting conversations about like an emerging China, for instance, where part of the answer to the question is not just going to be how do you resist an ill intention that you've identified, but rather how do you help define a positive outcome, right, that everyone can agree on, where there is an opportunity for, you know, most of the people on this planet to work together to achieve goals that they would like to achieve, while there may be differences as well, right? So I think that is really important, and I think it's, I guess, a good question right now would be, can you think of another case study that kind of got you onto that line of thinking, where there was a threat-based narrative on a topic that you think should have an opportunity-based narrative?
Wow, where to start? Let me just say in advance that I think many people, when they hear me talk about opportunity-based narrative, think I'm just a Pollyannish optimist, that it's all about opportunity and there's nothing wrong. No, when people ask me, am I an optimist or a pessimist? My answer is I'm both. I'm a long-term optimist. I believe in the end there are extraordinary opportunities available to us. And I'm a short-term pessimist. I believe there are significant obstacles and challenges that we need to address and overcome to get to those opportunities. And that's the call to action, because again, if you're a pure optimist, hey, everything's wonderful, it's going to turn out wonderful. Let's go out and have a beer, you know, let's celebrate. No, it leads to passivity.
Yeah.
And I think when I talk about opportunity-based narratives, the call to action is precisely because there are obstacles and challenges along the way. We need to mobilize and we need to act if we're going to achieve those opportunities. They're not going to happen by themselves. And so I think that that's the balance to be achieved, is at the end of the day, is the primary focus on the opportunity, or is the primary focus on the terrible things that are going to happen or could happen? And that's, so I think, you know, again, I think one of the challenges I see, and I've studied movements throughout history, in all different parts of the world, and the most successful movements in history, I can generalize, I think, have been driven by opportunity-based narratives. They've been driven by some inspiring opportunity that motivated people to come together and in many cases, make the ultimate sacrifice of giving up their lives for the movement. But it was because there was such a huge opportunity out there. And I think one of the challenges today is most of the movements that we have around us are driven by threat-based narratives. You know, again, the enemy's coming to get us. We're all going to die. We need to mobilize now and resist. The world's falling apart. You know, it's just terrible things versus what could we accomplish if we all came together? What's that extraordinary opportunity?
Yeah,
and that's what's missing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I noticed in your book that I quite liked was, I mean, one, I do really like that idea of long-term optimism and short-term pessimism. It's almost like you could say that long-term optimism requires a to-do list, right? Like a reasonable to-do list where you can be optimistic about, you know, the future because you know these things are achievable, but there is a list of things that need to be achieved. So we do need to get to work. But another thing that you identified that I really liked was you were talking about movements and movements that have been successful. And you're actually talking about a couple different movements, but you identified cells as important. And I thought that was very interesting. And for the audience, essentially in John's book, he's describing how successful movements have often been based on, and it's like a perfect number kind of thing, on small groups of self-driven groups of 3 to 15 people, I think it was. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You know, how do you see that playing out, and how important is that if you're trying to build a movement or if you want something to happen?
No, well, it's certainly relevant to movements, but it's a key theme in general in my perspective on the journey beyond fear. I think if we're going to make that journey beyond fear, we need to come together into these small groups. I call them impact groups. And again, it's in large part because of the emotional dimension. If we're trying to do this all by ourselves, it's easy to get overwhelmed and just, you know, lose the hope. Versus if you're part of a small group that is on the one side supports each other, has deep trust-based relationships with each other. That's why I think it has to stay a small group. I mean, if you go much beyond 15, the connections become much less deep. And so but it's providing a context for significant support for each other as you run into the challenges and you're not going to succeed all the time. We're here to support you, but on the other side, also challenging us as individuals in the group to say, what could we do to get even more impact? And these groups that I focus on, and by the way, they come in all different forms. I've looked at them in not just movements, but extreme sports. I mean, big wave surfing, small cells of surfers on the beach are the key to the success of these big wave surfers. Things in the personal growth area like Alcoholics Anonymous, small groups helping each other to overcome the challenges that we're facing. I mean, and in business, I also looked at this and found that in business environments where you see accelerating performance improvement, it's driven by small groups on the front line. And so it struck me that wherever you're looking for impact and wherever you're looking for ways to move beyond fear and motivate people to achieve that impact, small groups become a critical element of it. And so back to your point, in movements, again, the other key element in the successful movements that I've seen is that cellular structure. They are organized into small groups, small cells, and yes, they connect into broader networks to scale their impact, but the core unit of organization is a small cell. So,
yeah, it reminded me a little bit of SEAL teams, right? Like hence SEAL teams. And and the ways that you could apply that same mentality and organizational structure to other things. It would be fun to see, SEAL teams for other purposes. So by the way, don't forget to drop questions into the Q&A as we go. And I think we'll cover the two other pillars that John identified in his book, and then we'll jump into audience Q&A. So keep popping questions into the Q&A. We are going to get to them and hopefully have plenty of time for them. So John, the next pillar that you identified that kind of leads from the narratives. Once, I think in my mind, I thought of it as temporal, where it was once you've got your narratives figured out, right? Who am I? What am I? What's my role in the world? What's my organization's role in the world? And then you moved on to passion, which I think is an interesting and complex topic to get into, particularly if you're thinking about how to run a business, but also just in life. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about how that plays into how we succeed and the interplay? I mean, you talked a lot about the interplay between passion and rationality, et cetera.
Yeah, no, again, it's and the way I characterize it is the narrative, in my view, is a catalyst. It can be a catalyst to start that journey beyond fear. My belief is that passion is what I call the fuel. It's what gives us the energy to continue on that journey beyond fear over time. And again, the challenge for me is I've chosen a term, passion, that everybody uses. And in my experience, if I'm in a large group and ask people what's the definition of passion, I get as many different definitions as there are people in the group. So I hasten to specify, I'm talking about a very specific form of passion. It's what I call the passion of the explorer. And again, this comes from research looking at environments where we see sustained extreme performance improvement. What can we learn from those environments? And the thing that struck me was that in all those environments, very diverse environments, the common element was all the participants had this very specific form of passion. And very quickly, I highlight the three elements of the passion of the explorer. Passion of the explorer starts with a commitment, a long-term commitment to a specific domain that you're passionate about. But it's not just being in the domain, it's having increasing impact in that domain. You're driven to have more and more impact over time. That's the passion of the explorer. Second element of the passion of the explorer is what I call a questing disposition. The reaction of people who have this kind of passion when they're confronted with an unexpected challenge is excitement. Wow, this is amazing. I've never encountered that challenge before. How would I address it? This is an opportunity for me to learn and achieve even more impact in the domain that's important to me. So they're excited. They're looking for those challenges. They're not just waiting for them to happen. And then you get a third element, which is what I call a connecting disposition. And what you find is people have this kind of passion when they confront these unexpected challenges. Their first reaction is, who else can I connect with who could help me get to a better answer faster? Because they're driven to have more and more impact. And they recognize that no matter how talented or smart they are, they're going to get to better answers faster with other people. And so they're extremely well connected in their efforts to achieve more impact in the area. So I've become a strong believer of the passion of the explorer, that one of the challenges is I did some research where I surveyed the US workforce, the entire workforce in the United States. And at best, 14% of US workers have this kind of passion about their work. 86% do not. And I don't believe that's an accident. I believe, again, we have created environments that are deeply suspicious of this kind of passion. Passionate people ask questions. Passionate people take risks. Passionate people deviate from the script. What we need are workers who are just going to perform the assigned tasks predictably and reliably. And so I think it's actually impressive that 14% of workers have still managed to preserve that passion about their work. So it's
yeah, I mean, I think we've got plenty of folks like that in the FiRe community, right? Where you see that happening at conferences like FiRe or working groups that are particularly inspired. But it is easy to imagine it between any set of or field of organization, but particularly in the business world, right? What's the difference between walking into a room where you're in an older company where people are kind of just trying to preserve their positions and ride along. They don't, you're describing an issue that they have to address, and everybody kind of just freezes and goes, oh no, compared to, it's kind of the working groups that you see put together in more innovative places where people get excited. They're immediately calling people they know who are good at that issue. They're assembling a team. So I think that does ring really true. And you talked a little bit about I kind of enjoyed the part of the book where you dived into philosophy a little bit, and perhaps we could touch on that, because I think that it is easy for people to think of passion as a set of other things, and you talked a lot about that, and that rang really true to me, where passion is just a romantic thing, right? And it should be set aside. And as you mentioned, I think our education system originally was born out of an idea that we needed factory workers. And so you had to be able to just do the same task over and over again the same way and shut up. And passions, I think you said in the book, passions are, for your time, you can do it as a hobby later. So how do you picture, when you think of the best led efforts and how to inspire passion in others and teams, how do you picture overcoming those kinds of issues?
It's a huge challenge because, again, I believe we are in a world, I call a lot of my research is around what I call the big shift. And one dimension of the big shift is shifting our institutional models. I believe generalization, but all our large institutions around the world today, not just companies, but governments, schools, everything, are driven by scalable efficiency. The key to success is to become more and more efficient at scale, do things faster and cheaper, and tightly specify all the tasks that need to be done so they're done as efficiently as possible. To me, the paradox is the scalable efficiency model is becoming less and less efficient in a rapidly changing world. And in this kind of world that we're going into, the institutional model that will succeed is what I call scalable learning model, where the goal is to enable everyone in the organization to learn faster, and not just learn in the form of going to training programs or classes. It's learning in the form of creating new knowledge through action by confronting unexpected situations wherever they are. That's a very different form of learning. And having everybody, not just in the research labs or in innovation centers, but everybody, the janitors, the maintenance workers, the factory workers, everybody has that potential and opportunity to learn by addressing unseen problems and opportunities. I think that's a missed situation, but a huge shift. I mean, the culture and the way we organize is totally scalable efficiency. And
Yeah.
one way I have of framing one of the challenges and opportunities of the shift is in the scalable efficiency world, the mark of a strong leader is somebody who has an answer to every question. No matter what the question is, you can count on the leader to have an answer. By the way, if they don't, time to get rid of them and find somebody who does. In my view, in the scalable learning world, the mark of a strong leader is the one who has the most powerful questions and who will freely acknowledge they don't have an answer and ask for help. And that can be a real catalyst for drawing out passionate people to say, oh my God, this is a really interesting question. This is exciting. If we could come up with an answer to this, we could accomplish amazing things. Let's come together. Let's do this. But how many leaders do you know that are asking powerful questions and saying they don't know, they don't have an answer?
Certainly not in the political world very often, right?
Oh, I think
That's
in
all
the corporate world, everywhere, I think is.
Yeah. Well, let's cover the last pillar so everybody gets a sense of it, and then we'll jump to Q&A. We've got some more questions flowing in now. So
Okay.
your final pillar is probably, well, they're all hard, but it's one of the harder ones, I would guess. We're working on it too, and I think it's tough. And so you described the need for platforms. And essentially, if we're going back to the timeline, it's you need to know who you are, right? You need to know if you're an organization, what your story is, what your narrative rather is, and what your calls to action are that help people help you achieve those goals. And then you need that passion that keeps you going, even when it's hard. And then you dive into platforms and how important they are for actually communicating with each other as fast as possible, as efficiently as possible, et cetera. So talk more about that if you can, and what you see as the kind of top challenges.
No, well, again, I've chosen a term that everybody uses, platforms. I mean, who's not talking about platforms today? But I view the kind of platform I'm talking about as something that does not yet really exist. Most of the platforms we have today are either what I call aggregation platforms that are just supporting short-term transactions like buying and selling products, or relationship platforms that are helping people to stay connected with friends, family, broader networks, but it's all about just the relationship. The focus of the platform that I'm talking about, again, is learning. And again, I emphasize it's not learning in the form of sharing existing knowledge, because yes, everybody talks about the MOOCs and the video platforms where you can access lectures and classes online. No, I'm talking about platforms that bring people together to create new knowledge through action, where they're motivated to act. And they're coming together and very quickly forming these small groups that we talked about earlier. They're not just coming together as individuals, they're forming these small groups and supporting and challenging each other to learn faster, and then connecting into a broader network of groups that help them to scale that learning and impact. That's an untapped opportunity. And I think in a rapidly changing world, those kind of platforms are ultimately going to be the platforms that win.
Interesting. Yeah. I definitely will be pondering that more as we continue to try to do a similar thing with FiRe. Greg Brando asks, what would be an example of something building fear into the environment or organization? So I guess an external input of fear.
Well, I'll talk about it at two levels, because again, I think there are objective forces that are driving fear. And at a high level, I talk about three forces. One is intensifying competition on a global scale. That is scary. The second is accelerating pace of change. The things we thought we could count on are no longer there. That's scary. And then finally, because of all the connectivity we've created on a global scale, a small event somewhere in the world cascades into this extreme disruptive event. Dare I say pandemic. It's an example of extreme disruptive events. Those three together create enormous fear. And again, that's why my key message in my book is this is understandable. This is not irrational. There are reasons to be afraid. This is a scary world at one level. On the other side, I think that we're reinforcing and amplifying that fear on many different levels. One of the things I cringe about, and I work with senior executives of large companies, and when they see the need to drive change and transformation, they adopt what they call the burning platform message. If we don't change, we're all going to die. Okay, got it. I'm afraid. I'm going to hold on to what I have. I can't afford to take any risks. I'm going to resist the change. Thank you very much. So again, I think that's intensifying the fear versus recognizing that fear is an obstacle and that we need to find ways to move people beyond fear and excite them with opportunities. So
more honey with, or more flies with honey, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So Steve Coy asks, would you consider a universal basic income to be a useful tool to help many more people feel much less fear and therefore better able to pursue opportunity-based narratives?
You know, a longer conversation. I'm mixed feelings about universal basic income. My sense is that it's not addressing the core issue, which is what's the opportunity that's going to excite the people. If you don't have that opportunity, universal basic income can be a sense of complacency. Okay, you know, I'm not going to lose my income. I've got my income. I'm fine. But wait a minute, you know, there are other things that are, the world's changing at a more rapid rate. And so again, I think until and unless we focus on the emotions and how to move people beyond the fear and excite them, not just give them, you know, a sense of safety or complacency, I think that's what's really needed and missing here. So.
Yeah, it does remind me a bit of the kind of confusing paradox wherein people, you know, in rural farming regions are given subsidies, you know, because their farm's not producing as much, or the prices are wrong, and then end up also often being people who are against government subsidization, right?
Yeah.
So Paul Shoemaker asks, from the sometimes too pessimistic narrative, you talk about the power of groups. I strongly agree. And yet, as Evan wrote a few weeks ago, the half percenters, so that's a reference to did you see that global report? The premise was that a very small number of bad actors can ruin it for a very large number of positive actors. So he said that the half percenters have so much power. This morning on Wired.com, there was Facebook groups are destroying America. Do you see a path back to a critical mass of groups with positive narratives in spite of the forces pushing the other direction?
Yeah, again, at one level, I'm an optimist, and you know, people talk to me about, well, fear is something that's biologically built into all of us. The amygdala is responsive to fear. We're all, you know, going to be driven by fear, you know. And my response to that is, tell me one person that you know who aspires to live in fear. Who said, you know, my goal is to live in fear? Nobody.
Yeah.
We all have a hunger for hope and excitement. I think we all as human beings want that hope and excitement. And what we need are people, leaders and people of influence who can articulate that opportunity that really will motivate and excite us. And unfortunately, I think we're in a world where those leaders are absent. I think we've got, in all dimensions, leaders who are focused on driving fear, building fear versus, you know, how do we really excite people with opportunity?
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of, you mentioned a couple different, I mean, Martin Luther King was an obvious one where you were talking about people in past movements who have successfully led through messages of hope. And I think you pointed out some other ones where movements had become quite disjointed, and we all kind of know examples because they didn't have a specific message of hope and they were instead against something, not for something. And it was actually making me think about Winston Churchill as well, right? So in a moment when England kind of knew not what to do at the beginning of the Second World War, I mean, there was plenty of fear in the room, that's for sure, right? But he was giving messages of stalwart and perhaps kind of curmudgeonly hope and kind of never say die language that I think was very hopeful for a time like that. And so that definitely was on my mind when you were discussing that in the book, right? Where are the leaders that are actually describing a point where we want to be, not a reaction to something that's happening?
And in that context, I'm a big proponent of something that I call zoom out, zoom in approaches to change, which is on the one side, the zoom out, and this comes from working with some of the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley. The zoom out is a 10 to 20 year horizon and really focusing on framing a really big opportunity that could inspire people. But on the other side, the zoom in is 6 to 12 months. And the focus there is what limited number of initiatives, 2 or 3, could we pursue in the next 6 to 12 months that would help us to accelerate our movement towards that longer term opportunity. And I originally came on this as a strategist. I found it as a very powerful strategy. But part of the reason I think it's a powerful strategy is the emotions. On the one side, they're framing a really inspiring opportunity out in the future. But the reaction of a lot of people with fear is skepticism and dismissal. Say, that's a fantasy, that's never going to happen. I'm just going to focus on what I need to do today. But if you, through the short-term initiatives, can demonstrate progress and impact, so it's not just words and speeches about this wonderful opportunity, it's action and impact. Now you start to overcome the skepticism.
Yeah.
And people start to say, wow, how can I become part of this? This is exciting.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
But it takes that roadmap and those first steps, right? Someone has to start. So Steve Coy asked, do you think software tools that make it easier to create models of dynamic systems, experiment with them, refine them, and play what-if games could be useful enabling technology for scalable learning?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I just can't resist. One of my favorite quotes is from Pablo Picasso, the famous painter many decades ago. He once made an observation and said, computers are absolutely useless. All they can do is provide you with the answers. And he said, what's really important are the questions. And I think in that context, again, there are a lot of tools, computing and technology tools that are available to us. But the real question is, what's the question? What are we trying to answer? What are we seeking? And so again, it's focusing on framing the opportunities, the questions to drive the opportunities, and then yes, using these tools to start to show how you can make the journey there and what obstacles and challenges are going to come along the way. But I think that's again the key question is what's the question? What's the
That sounds like modern computers stuff to me. So Esther Dyson asks, I was in a discussion today around teaching and they favored one-on-one tutoring. I believe people learn best in groups. What is your opinion, and can you cite some academic sources I can pass along?
Wow. Well, I'd have to go back into the research. I do believe, I think Esther's instincts are absolutely right that one-on-one can be very helpful. There's the whole notion of mentoring and one-on-one relationships in that context. But in my experience, again, if you've got students coming together in small groups where they're sharing knowledge with each other and really, again, challenging each other to come up with better ideas and answers. But again, I think it's going back to the more basic question of what are you teaching? What's the role of teaching? Is it just to teach existing knowledge, share existing knowledge? Okay. Just have students sit at their desks and listen carefully to the teacher and memorize what the teacher says, and they'll be successful. Who needs groups? What are groups for? They'll start talking to each other versus listening to the teacher. And so again, I think that it goes back to the question of what's the role of education and teaching, and is the focus sharing existing knowledge, or is it on motivating and exciting students to really pursue new knowledge?
Yeah. Sally asks, as you may know, we are a small and passionate team, especially in the era of Zoom. Do you have any suggestions about how to not only let passion flourish and encourage passion in the work environment, but also not devolve from a brainstorm into an interruption storm?
Yeah, I think again, the raises a whole set of of issues and questions. I think, and one of the key themes in my book and in my life is the notion of balance, that it's usually not either or, it's both together, and you have to find ways to combine the two. I think that the key to impact and progress and learning faster with passion is having a sense of focus of what is that opportunity that's bringing us all together. What's the shared commitment we have to having more and more impact? And again, I've done research around what are the practices that these small groups can adopt that will help them to learn faster and accelerate performance. And one of them is really investing the time and effort to agree on what's the shared outcome that we're all committed to. And do we understand what that means and why it's so important and so exciting? But the other piece, and this is, again, the balancing act, because it can fall apart if you just do this, is the notion of productive friction from diversity. But the key to learning faster is in that small group that I talked about, if they all come from the same background and all same schools and same communities and whatever, good luck. They're not going to learn as fast as a small group that brings people together from different backgrounds, different genders, different ethnic groups, different mindsets, but with a shared commitment to that outcome, where they are all committed to the same outcome. And so they're challenging each other with respect. They're not challenging each other to dismiss each other or put each other down. They're challenging each other because they share that commitment to getting to a better and better outcome. And so, again, to the question, I think it's that balance of, if you're all committed to the shared outcome, then the passion can be unleashed and flourish, and there can be a lot of challenging. And I comment that when I go to a new company as a consultant, I'll walk down the hall, and if I see conference rooms where people are sitting around the table smiling at each other, I think it's a very dysfunctional company. On the other hand, if they're sitting around the table, pounding the table and arguing with each other, I think there's hope. They're allowed to challenge, versus, just follow the leader, do what the leader says and smile and show that you're happy. And I don't know.
Well, and it speaks a little bit too to kind of circling back to the importance of narratives being accurate, I guess, or the right narratives, right? So when you were talking about the importance of building a narrative for either yourself or your organization that's offering a call to action and a unity of purpose, that unity of purpose will need to be the right one if your group is to be successful. They have to agree, right?
Well, and it has to be one that they all share a passion about. I mean, you could have an outcome that's really meaningful and valuable, but some of the people just aren't that passionate about it. Their passion is somewhere else. And so recognize that and find people who share the passion about that outcome, and they don't just agree that it's a good outcome. They're passionately driven to get to that outcome and do whatever they can to increase the impact in that area. So I think,
I've got a good one for you that I think you'll like, John, from Steve Coy. So Steve asks, do you know of anyone currently working to create the kind of platforms for learning, formation of small productive groups, etc.? And are you interested in trying yourself to make that happen? And do you need help?
Oh my goodness. I need lots of help. No, my goal for writing the book was to be a catalyst and help people to see the opportunity and the need to make the journey beyond fear. But as much as I'd like to believe that just by reading a book you can make the journey, I'm not sure that's going to happen. I think that there's a need to create programs that will help people come together and make that journey together over time. And so my goal in writing the book was to use it as a foundation to build a new center that will ultimately deploy a learning platform where you'll bring people together, offer programs around specific topics like passion or narrative, help people to develop a better understanding and make progress on that. But as quickly as possible, bring them together into small groups so that they are acting together in that journey beyond fear, and then connecting those small groups into larger networks. And, again, I believe this is something that hasn't really been done before. I would welcome if there are examples that people have of this being done, but because it has not been done before, I'm not so arrogant to believe that I know how to do this. This is more a question of, what could we accomplish if we develop those kinds of learning platforms? And I need a lot of help, so I would welcome.
It's almost like you need to assemble it's like you need to assemble a small and efficient team. So Nathaniel,
small and passionate team.
Small and passionate team. Yeah. Nathaniel Miller asks, I'm trying to understand the nature of the global problem we are facing. It seems the more things we get connected, the less that we can stay connected. On these learning platforms, how do you get members more connected after they succeed at, I think, leaning into their breakthrough? Maybe it's not a problem, but won't you end up with scalability problems like that of a dating service? If a learning platform builds relationships that bring breakthrough, it seems the new things that will result will necessarily bring the opposite of greater togetherness. So I think what he's talking about is the digitization problem, right? So the disconnection that people feel, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, and again, I think the disconnection that we're seeing on a lot of platforms today is because of fear. I mean, people are being driven by fear. They tend to avoid people who disagree with them. They tend to connect with the people who they agree with, and they isolate. And a lot of people use platforms just to brag and show off that they're doing very well. So I'm not in any trouble. See what great things I'm doing, but they're afraid at the bottom. And I think, again, my hope and belief is that if you cultivate this passion of the explorer among the people who are participating on the platform, they're driven to connect with others. They're not wanting to isolate. They're wanting to connect. And yes, they may be really passionate about a specific opportunity. It could be helping marginalized people in a community to become more productive participants in the economy, or it could be around environmental issues. But ultimately, I believe that all those opportunities are connected, that people will ultimately see that the opportunity that excites them is connected to many other opportunities. They might not be as excited about the other opportunities, but they could recognize that they could actually learn from others who are pursuing other opportunities and be more connected at scale. And that's what I hope the learning platform will encourage, is that, you'll learn a lot faster if you connect.
Well, and perhaps that's an area where there's more research to be done, right, on how you avoid those pitfalls and kind of trial and error for what doesn't work digitally for people versus, I think anonymity is a big problem, right? So if you're not anonymous and you actually are with people that you do know, it changes a lot of things compared to just free for all.
Yes, no, for sure. And I agree completely. I think this is definitely an area for a lot of learning in terms of what's really required to bring people together versus pull them apart. And
So Mark Prensky asks, it sounds like you rely on leaders to inspire and motivate people around shared opportunities. Why don't we train people starting very early to recognize and act on their own passions and concerns, whatever they are, and use platforms to find people who share them?
No, completely. Again, I think this is a very complex and multifaceted kind of situation we're facing. I believe that our educational system needs to be completely redefined and restructured around this notion of the focus of the education system should be on helping every child find their passion and then pursue their passion and connect with others who share their passion. But that's not the educational system we have today. And I think that that's ultimately a key to driving. I think the challenge is that, we have a lot of people who've come out of school who are now firmly of the belief that passion is irrelevant. Forget about passion, just do the job, advance in the hierarchy, and that's the key to success. And by the way, I'm afraid because I might not advance or somebody might take my job. But I think that for those people, having a leader who can set an example and just show what's possible can be very helpful in opening them up again to, oh, wow, that leader is really passionate. What's my passion? And, how do I bring that out and connect with it and connect with others who share that passion? So I don't think it's one or the other. I think we need to rethink the school systems at a fundamental level. And we need to also find ways to take older people who've basically been cultivated into this notion that passion is suspect and key to failure, and really give them examples where they can be inspired to say, wow, this is worth doing.
Yeah, and you touched on that in the book, and I think that that's maybe a good closing note, because I think it's such a big problem in this world, and maybe you could go a little bit deeper into some of the stuff that you put into the book about, what if I'm not feeling like I have my passion? How do I find it? What do I do if I'm just stuck in a job I don't care about, just going up that ladder? So you had what do you think is most critical in the part of the book where you're describing that in terms of how to find that?
No, I think the first step is just recognizing that it's worth looking for. I mean, if you're not looking for it, you're never going to find it. It'd be extremely rare to find it. And I think it involves many things, and part of the book, I should say, is a personal memoir, my own journey beyond fear. And I really didn't discover my passion until I was in my 50s. Even though I was pursuing things that had elements of passion. And one of the things that helped me was just to look back in my life and say, what really excited me at various points in my life? Where was I truly excited? And, at one level, if you look at them, it sounds like, well, there are so many different things. It's just this guy has no focus or, can't stay focused. But in fact, I saw that there was a common element in all those things, as diverse as they were, that were exciting me. There was an underlying theme that was really my passion. And I finally connected with it and drew it out and started to pursue it in a much more explicit way. And I think that was important. But it's that notion again. And another question that I often ask people is, just tell me the people that really inspire you and excite you. Who are those people? And what are they doing that might be what your passion is too? And so there are many ways to start to connect with that passion. But yeah.
Well, John, I want to respect your time. We're coming to the end of the hour here, so thank you so much. For those who do not have John's book yet, it is called The Journey Beyond Fear. You should absolutely get it, and I have placed the Amazon link in the chat there in case you're trying to track it down. For those who are joining us who are not SNS members or FiRe attendees, please join us at SNS as a member. You can go to www.stratnews.com, or if you'd like to see FiRe HQ, which is our private social network, which includes access to all of our publications, you can go to fire-hq.com and join us for many more conversations like this. Thank you again, John. It's an absolute honor, and that was quite fun. So I appreciate all the aspects of the conversation being both intellectual and enjoyable.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of this and look forward to more discussions over time, for sure.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time.